What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. We have been continuing this whole year, and we'll be continuing into 2022, looking at how the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous help us achieve emotional sobriety. And I remind everyone that in 12 and 12, Bill specifically stated in discussing step 12 that if we practice these principles in our daily affairs, that we and those about us begin to achieve emotional sobriety. So emotional sobriety is the intended therapeutic value and benefit of working the 12 steps. We've been exploring how the 12 steps help us achieve this state of emotional sobriety, this kind of consciousness that goes with it. And that's what we're going to be talking about and focusing on today. So what we've looked at is how the steps are sequential and interdependent. One step builds on the next step. Step one, we talked about, builds a certain charge that is then resolved and discharged in step two, but then it builds another charge that moves us towards step three. Well, that process is continued throughout the steps. And the arc of our development in working these steps is to increase our emotional maturity, is to finally grow up in our lives and learn how to cope with life as it is. That's the essence, if you will. That's the heart and the soul of what emotional sobriety is all about. Coping with life as it is, not as we'd expect it to be or how we think it's supposed to be. That comes with an incredible amount of personal freedom, because when I am grounded in that sense that I can handle whatever happens in my life, now I have a freedom to accept life on life's terms. And I don't need to keep controlling things, manipulating people, trying to get them to do things my way. Now we're shooting for that. No one's going to pull that off perfectly, but we're striving to go in that direction. My dear friend, Dr. Kempler, used to say, there's nothing wrong with striving for perfection as long as you never fool yourself into thinking you can achieve it. Same thing here. There's nothing wrong with striving to have emotional sobriety in your life every day, but don't think you're going to pull that off perfectly. Now, one way I want you to go back and start to think about the change that's taken place in us is the change in our consciousness. So I've talked at times before about this idea of differentiation. You can think about that as a level of emotional maturity. Our level of differentiation determines the kind of consciousness we have. Just like the age of a child will determine the kind of consciousness they have as they go through different stages of cognitive development. There was this interesting story that was told when someone was trying to make the point about the different states of consciousness in a child. Is this 4-year-old was coming home from school and his mom had made some snacks for him and his brother. His brother was 12 years old. He was 5 years old. Mom put 2 cookies on his plate and 4 cookies on his brother's plate. Well, the 4-year-old just threw a fit. How come I don't have all those cookies? And mom tried to answer the the child's, upset by saying, well, look, your brother's older. He burned more calories today. He played a sport after school. No logical explanation was going to satisfy. He's got 4, I've got 2. Out of frustration, mom picks up a butter knife, cuts his 2 cookies in half. So now he has 4 on his plate. He looks up at mom and says, "You're the best mommy in the whole world." In his mind, the world was made right when she cut his 2 cookies in half, because now he had how many? 4 cookies, just like his brother. But he didn't have 4 cookies, because those of us that have operational thinking, we can understand that he didn't get the same number, even though the number was the same. He didn't get the same quantity, right? It was different. The proportion was different. But a child at 4 years old can't understand that. Children can't understand how to reverse the path. Like if they get to this point, if they go from here to B, they don't understand that they can get back the same way by just following that path back. That kind of thinking comes later in life. Well, the same is true with differentiation. Emotionally, we can't see certain things when our level of differentiation is low. When our level of differentiation is low and there's a problem, our first response is to think, who's to blame for this problem? You see, with low differentiation comes this need to blame someone for the problem as though that's going to fix the problem. And blame doesn't fix a problem. It makes it worse. It's like running up to a fire with a bucket of gasoline and throwing the gasoline on the fire thinking you're going to put the fire out. Well, you're not going to put the fire out. But what the steps are doing is the steps are helping us increase our differentiation. And as our differentiation is increasing, so is our consciousness. Our consciousness is expanding. We are seeing possibilities we couldn't see before. If there were 2 15-year-olds sitting there, mom came and cut the cookies and say, now you have 4, shut up. The 15-year-old would say, no, I don't. I still have 2. You just cut them in half. Right? Because the consciousness is different at 14 years old. Our consciousness is changing in incredible ways as we are working these steps. Later on, at some point, we will go through the steps and start looking at these things from like the point of view of how does your consciousness change? How does your self-esteem change? All of these things after we finish going through all the steps. But today I wanted to make this point that our awareness, which is, I'm going to say, synonymous with our consciousness, our awareness is changing in both quantity and quality as we mature. Now, what does that mean? Well, before, our awareness served our immaturity. It helped me manipulate you to get you to do what I wanted you to do. It made me aware of the best ways to gaslight you, how to figure out how to get you to do what I want you to do so I'd feel okay, how to flip things around and try to change the narrative on something, or how to lay a should on you that's going to make you feel bad if you don't do what I want you to do. Or as Gerald Zook said, we develop all of these silence-inducing strategies, and we use our awareness to try to silence someone. So when our awareness is serving our low level of differentiation, it's going to be assisting us to be more manipulative and controlling. And then our intellect, wherever it's at, is going to join that. And we're going to try to be as clever at doing that and trying to manipulate people so they don't even realize it. And when we can't do it that way, we can't be sneaky about it. We just try to have power over them. I'm reading a great book right now, and I'll be talking more about it, but it's called Intimate Terrorism. And it's about relationships. And the author talks about, my God, we are terrorists with each other in terms of how we try to take each other hostage and control each other and play all these power trips. Low level of differentiation is related to needing to have power, needing to be right, which means somebody else is wrong. Now, as we start to grow along these new lines in terms of now moving towards becoming our best, having the best possible attitude towards ourselves, towards life, towards our relationship, our consciousness starts to shift. Our awareness starts to shift. Now we need to start using our awareness to become aware of what's going on with us so that we can now use our awareness to become our best possible self. That is what we are being reminded to do. Because remember, step 7, 6, and 7 was the pivot towards the best possible attitude towards life, towards ourselves, and towards others, and towards our relationship with the God of our understanding. What that meant was afterwards, we sat down, we started to take responsibility for things in our life. We started making a commitment to clean those things up. Then we got into action. We took responsibility. We cleaned up the past, but cleaning up the past isn't going to create the best possible attitude because it's about cleaning up the past, but also taking care of the present. Step 10 was about integrating what we learned in 8 and 9 in now our daily life, right? Continue to take personal inventory. When we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So now what is step 11 inviting us to do? Well, Herb gave an incredible discussion. And if you have not heard or hear Herb's discussion on step 11 the last 2 weeks, then please go to the videos that Patrick is posting, on the YouTube channel that we have for this meeting, and listen to what Herb said about step 11, because it's just some great information. But I want to talk about 11 now from this point of view of consciousness. So let me just read 11 again. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So I want to focus on the seeking in the conscious contact. That's what I want to talk about. So this is Fritz Perls, and this is a quote from his book, Gestalt Therapy, verbatim. He says, awareness is by and of itself curative. So really take that in. When we become aware, it is curative, because with full awareness of what we're doing and how we're doing it, because Gestalt, remember, is focused on the here and now, right? So with full awareness of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, you become aware of this organismic self-regulation. Well, what is that? That's the desire I described in us that moves us towards wholeness, that moves us towards completion, that moves us in the direction of being what we can be, that moves us in the direction of taking care of ourselves. This self-regulation is the part of us when I'm hungry, I have a desire to eat. That's self-regulation. And when I am connected to that, my life is moving always in the direction that I needed to move. And not because I'm controlling it, but because I'm following myself. We'll talk more about that later. So because with full awareness, you become aware of this organismic self-regulation. You can let the organism take over without interfering, meaning you can follow what's important to you without stopping yourself and interfering by telling yourself, I shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't want this. See, that's how we interrupt ourselves. So without interrupting ourselves, we can rely on the wisdom that's inside of us. Well, it's an incredible wisdom in our body that if you're too hot, you're going to perspire to cool yourself off. You're not thinking that. Your body just does that. That's an incredible amount of wisdom. He says, and contrast this to the whole pathology of self-manipulation, meaning I have to control myself. I have to make myself in the image of what I think is going to be the person that will be loved and accepted and belong. That's the whole pathology of self-manipulation, environmental control. I have to control everything around me so that I feel good, and so on, that interferes with this subtle organismic self-control. So what Fritz is saying is that there's a paradox here, is that when I become aware of what I am doing, when I bring my full awareness to it, at that moment, there's a new possibility. But without an awareness that I'm a liar, I can never become honest. Without an awareness and admission that I'm powerless, I can never find another power. Without my awareness of how my emotional dependence is getting me to take everything personal and generates all of these unenforceable rules, I can't clean up that behavior. And now learn how to flow with whatever's going on around me, because I'm going to either be reactive because I've taken it personal, or I'm going to get upset because you're not doing what I think you're supposed to do. Step 11, when we look at it through the lens of emotional sobriety, is saying we need to commit ourselves to continue to expand our awareness and consciousness of who we are and what we're doing, as well as to experiment with what is possible. And the third force in psychology is what happened is these folks that came in, like Carl Rogers, who talked about client-centered psychotherapy, Gestalt therapy. There was all kinds of transpersonal psychotherapy. All of these different approaches said that the purpose, the goal of psychotherapy was to expand our consciousness. That's what this is all about. And isn't it interesting that that shows up here in step number 11, as we're trying to now develop this emotional sobriety and achieve emotional sobriety in our night. So we're going to continue to talk about this for a while, but I think that's enough said for tonight. Let me invite my two esteemed colleagues in, Roger and Tom, and see what they'd like to say about this.
Well, it's expansion is the word that I'm just hanging out in my noggin right now as you're talking. And I love how, as we move into, as we've been listening to Herb lead us in discussion on step 11 through the lens of emotional sobriety, is how much of this has this synchronicity thing in my life as I'm experiencing, which is how much of this brings me back around to a lot of the spiritual explorations I've done all the way back in the 1900s, and all those in those old days. And it's like one of the things, it comes into that place of being, well, first of all, be here now, being that so much of this has to do with being fully in the present as our best self, like what you were talking about, Alan. And it's so easy, I think, or it has been in my life, for that to sound trite, but it's there, and I think part of this is age. I think the older I get, the more it just doesn't sound that way to me at all anymore. No, it's not trite at all. It's just very important. It's about being here. And the thing, I'll just say this, because this is one that I have been I've experienced in my life that has really made a huge change in my life through the years, and I've had to relearn it many times. Well, sure, we'll have to relearn it again, but I'm talking to some clients, a few clients right now about it, and that is this wonderful principle of when we're focusing on what we need to focus on, reconnecting, which is that step 11 is connecting to the greater world, what all that is. This wonderful freedom comes with, I do not have to be understood by another person. That has been one of the driving themes. And I know I am not alone in this idea, this sense of like, you just have to understand this. I have to have you understand. And it is so beautiful when you get to the place where you go, I can still offer stuff and say, I hope you understand this, or I want you to, I would like for you to understand it, or I would like you to get a piece of this or whatever. But I mean, and I tell you, one of the most powerful places I've experienced that and continue to experience it is in my marriage. The idea that my wife does not have to understand me is it may seem strange to somebody who's not ever heard that before, but it's beautiful. It's like, because when I believe that expectation that you've really helped me see, Alan, through this work, that's one of the biggest, most dangerous expectations I could possibly have in my life. And I've had it certainly in my first marriage and many other relationships and through a lot of this marriage, is that this, not just I need to be understood, this person needs to understand me. This person, and that's what love is, that's what, and it's like, that's what'll prove that she loves me. It's like, no. And it's like, all I know how to say, and I'll, maybe we'll talk about it more as we go along, but because I don't really have the words today, because it's just sort of a thing I'm having right now. It's just like, the good news is it's simply not true. She does not. It doesn't. I have a wonderful wife who works hard to understand me, and we have communication where we try to understand what we are communicating about. But when we talk about this deeper stuff about who we are and what we're learning and what we're doing with our lives, this time limited life that we have, it's like, I mean, hell, I don't understand it. How would I even identify if somebody got it right? So I don't know if that makes any sense today, but
it makes a ton of sense. I'm a fan of Byron Katie, and one of the things she talks about when she talks about, we have these ideas that we think that this is the truth and things have to be this way for me to be okay, right? And she goes through what she calls it, the inquiry process. And I love her final stage of that process. So she says, so if you're saying, well, I really need my husband to understand me or my wife to understand me for me to be okay about this, she says, all right, try this, turn it around. We go, what do you mean? Well, turn it around. Say, I need to understand myself so that I feel better about this. Just turn it around. Put it back on yourself instead of putting it on somebody else. It's a great owning of projection. In Gestalt therapy, that's what we call it. It's owning the projection. And it is so powerful when people turn this thing around and they realize, I've been sitting here thinking I need everybody else to understand me for me to be okay. But I need to understand myself first. If they understand me, that's great. That's the gravy on the turkey, but it's not the turkey.
Well, but you're seeking the exact same thing. I was talking to somebody about that, my first client this morning. You're seeking the exact same thing that you were seeking. It's just, you're just seeking it from a better source.
Right.
It's like, as long as I need this from, as long as I need, I need understanding. I want understanding. It's like, okay, how's that going to happen? Well, Roger's got to understand me.
Right. That's right.
It's like, well, if you own the projection, like you say, now I'm still seeking what I want. Now I can spend the rest of my life seeking, and I'm going to have so much more success with learning when I'm looking in the right place.
Yeah. All right, Raj, batter up.
What comes to mind with what you were just saying, Tom, is the distinction that's made in some of the Buddhist literature that I read between a preference and a demand, right? And mutual understanding can really help us connect more deeply to our loved ones, to friends, to others. And it's a great experience, but if it's a demand, if it's an unhealthy dependency, right, to put it in the terms that we've been talking about with emotional sobriety all of these months, that's when it becomes a real problem. Because if I feel like it's a necessity, like you were just saying, then it just becomes a substitute for the real issue, which is, am I giving it to myself? Am I able to give myself that depth of acceptance, not just understanding, but acceptance? And then the only other thing I wanted to add, because I'm curious what other people want to share. When we talk about organismic self-regulation, and we often use biological examples of that. If we're hungry, we need to eat. If we have to pee, we need to go to the bathroom. If we're thirsty, we need to drink. But as we become more differentiated, and as I slowly, in my case at least, start to become aware of my own tendencies more, my own reactivity more, I begin to realize that it's not really that I react in the ways that I do that's the problem. It's I don't have the state of consciousness I need to be able to observe that reaction, to not be so identified with that anger I'm feeling right now as me. That sadness I'm feeling right now is all there is to me. That anxiety I'm feeling right now is all there is to me. It's just so easy for us to identify, literally be possessed by, right? In terms of
that's what I was going to say. It's possession, isn't it? We become possessed.
Well, and the other term I love to use is to be preoccupied, right? I love that term because it says so much about what's going on in my consciousness, right? I get so filled with that emotion in that moment. I am too preoccupied to be able to remember that emotions, as intense and real and either joyful or troubling and devastating as they may be, they will pass, and it's so easy to lose sight of that in the grips for all of us, I think, in the grips of really intense emotion. And it's so difficult for us to remember that even in that intensity, even in that moment, there's much more to me than that emotion. Now, we can also, my thing about balance, right? I was reading a Buddhist book the other day, and this Buddhist teacher said she got so good at being able to step back and observe herself, she became aware at a certain point that she was no longer experiencing life at an emotional level at all. And she realized that was a really big problem for her, that she was not finding balance between the actual spontaneous experience of life in the moment and all the feelings that we're subject to that go along with that, both positive and painful. So that was a real expansion of her consciousness in that moment, even though she'd been teaching Zen Buddhism for decades, right? So it's all a process. I encourage all of us to be really gentle with ourselves in the process of learning and growing, because it is, if we're open to it, it's absolutely never ending, right? It's absolutely never ending. It's just a continuing process of learning. So I'd like to turn it over to other people now.
Well, let me just say this real quick, because you just did this for me, Roger. It's like you just helped me get this idea, understanding that no two objects can occupy the same space at the same time. No two states of consciousness can occupy the same space at the same time. So that's why we need the expansion, because it's not a matter of choosing between two states of our consciousness. It's about being aware of all states that we can become aware of. And so that's why expansion is growth. Growth is expansion. So we're like plate spinners, on Ed Sullivan back in the day. Yeah. I know a lot of young people don't know what we're talking about, but it's like, all of those different parts of ourselves. When you're talking about the Buddhist teacher that you were reading, it's like it was so pleasant to be doing the one that, she just stayed right there, and the other plates were going to fall.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. I do have one other thought with organismic self-regulation, that, as we become, as we travel the road of differentiation gradually, which again, we stay connected to others, even as we differentiate in a deep understanding of differentiation. Mm-hmm. But it's not that we're always at the mercy of organismic self-regulation at a physical level. That's another point I wanted to make. Eventually, as our values become clearer to us, of course, we will have hierarchies of possibilities in our experience. So I may need to do without sleep at certain points if that serves a deeper value. in myself and in my life that I want to be aligned with in my life. I may sacrifice certain things because I feel like that sacrifice is more aligned with the values that I hold dear, with the best self version of myself that I'm trying to be. So it's not that we're always being impulsive with emotions and we have to show everything we feel in order to be true to ourselves. It's not like that at all. It's a much more subtle and complex process than that.
Well,
so I just wanted to sound that point. Yeah.
No, but see, your point that you're making is, see, what it is, it's just the now application of that same principle that moves us towards wholeness. Because now we're talking about our integrity. You know, when you talk about value-based, I'm honoring myself. When I operate out of honoring myself, see, now I'm moving towards my wholeness. And sometimes that means certain other parts of me are going to be, you know, now not as important as what I'm focusing on at this particular point in time. And
exactly.
But that's helping me, right? That's helping me achieve that wholeness again. See, that's the important thing we're talking about.
It is. It's still organismic self-regulation.
Totally.
Even at the level of our values and our self-esteem.
I mean, whatever way we start to apply it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
See, one of the things that, you know, in working with you, Roger, through the years with the emotional release work that you've done, is that when someone is blocking an emotion, for example, let's say a need to cry, and they interfere with that crying process, it's such a good metaphor for how we interfere with ourselves in our lives, right? If I have this rule, somehow I'm not supposed to cry because I don't want to give that other person the satisfaction of my tears or whatever is causing me to hold on to it. See, that is blocking me from moving towards dealing with the emotion so I get to a place where I'm whole again, right? That I come back to that, whatever it is, whatever you call it, a steady state, the dynamic equilibrium, whatever it is that I'm moving towards. I like to think of it as wholeness.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.